My name is Anna Blake, and when my father kicked me out for ruining my future, I didn't scream or beg. I left with nothing but a suitcase and my pride. Months later, I returned to that same house, stepped out of a private helicopter, took Jake Reynolds' hand in mine, and looked my parents dead in the eye as I said, "You underestimated the wrong daughter. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to know who's hearing my story tonight." It was 2:07 a.m. when I eased open the front door, holding my breath as if I could will the creaky hinges into silence. My sneakers landed softly on the hardwood, but I barely made it 3 steps into the dark hallway before click. The hallway light snapped on like a trap. And there he stood. My father, Greg Blake, still in his work shirt, jaw clenched, eyes blazing. "Where have you been getting yourself knocked up?" I froze. Heat surged to my face as his words sank into my chest like glass shards. Behind him, my mom stepped out from the living room, arms crossed, robe tied tight like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. "I asked you a question, Anna." My throat tightened. I was with Jake, we were just talking." "Talking?" His voice rose. "You sneak in at 2 a.m. and you expect me to believe that?" I didn't say anything. "If you ruin your future," Mom added coldly, her tone cutting like a knife, "we won't lift a finger to help you." My hands curled into fists. I didn't plan this, I didn't do anything wrong, and yet I was already guilty in their eyes. "I'm not ruining anything," I snapped. "I'm 18, I'm legally an adult, you don't get to control me like I'm 12. Dad stepped closer. "You're right, I don't, but I also don't have to support you while you throw your life away." There was no mistaking what he meant, that if I made even one wrong move, I was on my own. "Support," I laughed, bitter. "You mean emotionally, financially, because neither of you's been doing that for a long time." "Watch it," he warned. "You live under my roof." "Then maybe I won't anymore," I shouted. My voice cracked, and suddenly I couldn't tell if it was rage or heartbreak clawing at my throat. Mom looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. "You want to act grown? Fine. But grown women face the consequences of their actions." I stared at her. I had hoped for just a flicker she might soften, but she didn't flinch. A silence fell over us, so thick you could hear the hum of the refrigerator all the way down the hall. "You think I don't know what this is about?" Dad's voice dropped low. "You're out there with that boy letting him ruin your future." "Jake hasn't ruined anything," I snapped. "You don't even know him." He didn't answer. He just stepped aside, gesturing at the staircase like it was a courtroom exit. My heart was hammering. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I swallowed hard. "I'll figure it out on my own if that's what it takes." Dad nodded slowly. "You better." I climbed the stairs with my jaw clenched and tears threatening. I didn't look back. If I did, I was afraid I'd scream or break. In my room, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I felt like I'd just walked off a battlefield with no armor, no allies. But I wasn't going to let them see me cry. Not tonight. They wanted me to fail, to crawl back, ashamed. But I was done chasing their version of acceptable. I was Anna Blake, and I was going to rewrite my story, even if I had to do it alone. It had been 29 days since that night. Since the yelling. Since my father's words branded themselves into my memory like hot iron. Since I decided, without really having a plan, to figure it out on my own. I hadn't spoken to either of them beyond stiff, clipped exchanges in the kitchen or hallway. My mother acted as if I was a stranger who owed her rent. My father just avoided me altogether. They didn't ask where I was going anymore, or when I'd be back. It was like they'd already erased me from the family, and I hadn't even left yet. And tonight, it all caught up to me. I sat cross-legged on my bed in the dim glow of my nightstand lamp, staring down at the small plastic stick in my trembling hand. 2 pink lines. Not 1, 2, I blinked. Maybe I was imagining it. I turned it toward the light, still there. I read the instructions for the 4th time, my eyes skimming over phrases like hormone detection and over 99% accurate. I'd bought the test from the gas station 2 blocks away, hoodie up, hood tight, barely making eye contact with the clerk. I'd even bought gum and a pack of Twizzlers to make it look casual, like a girl out for snacks, but this was anything but casual. The silence in my room suddenly felt suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in on me inch by inch. My breath hitched, then again. And then it came like a dam breaking. I dropped the test onto the floor and sank to my knees, my body folding in on itself. A sob ripped out of me before I could even try to hold it back. It was loud, messy, animal. The kind of sound no one prepares you to make. My forehead pressed to the edge of the bed. My arms wrapped around my chest like I could keep my insides from spilling out. Oh God, the words barely made it past my lips. How am I supposed to do this alone? I wasn't ready. I was barely holding it together as it was. No money, no job, no plan, no support. Jake didn't even know yet. I hadn't told him. I barely knew how to say it out loud myself. The ceiling fan hummed softly overhead, slicing the silence into pieces. My window overlooked the apartment complex's flickering street lamp and a few trees swaying in the early spring wind. I curled up on the mattress, pulling my blanket over me like armor, even though nothing could protect me from the truth pressing down on me. Pregnant. I was pregnant. Every part of me wanted to hit rewind, to go back to last month, to last week, even yesterday, anywhere but here, but I couldn't. And deep down, I already knew I wouldn't go to them for help. Not after what they said, not after that night. I stared up at the ceiling, hot tears still streaming down my face, my pillow muffling the quiet sobs that kept escaping. I wasn't crying because I was ashamed. I was crying because I felt like I was vanishing. No one tells you how lonely it feels to sit with a truth this big when no one else even knows it exists. I reached for my phone. I wanted to call someone, Jake maybe. But my thumb hovered over his contact, frozen. What if he panicked? What if he said the wrong thing? What if he said nothing? Instead, I opened my notes app and started typing, the screen glowing against my tear-streaked face. To my baby, if you're real and if you're staying, please know I already love you. Even if I'm scared, even if I mess everything up, you didn't ruin me. They think you will, but you didn't. I'll protect you, I promise. Somehow I'll protect you. I pressed save. And for the first time since I saw those 2 lines, I felt the tiniest flicker of something warm inside me. It wasn't relief. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was the first spark of strength. The sun was too bright for the heaviness in my chest. I sat on a wooden bench at Crest Hill Park, the old one near the duck pond that still had initials carved into the backrest from teenagers who thought forever could fit inside 2 letters and a heart. I used to think that was sweet. Now I just thought it was naive. Jake was late. Only by 5 minutes, but still, every minute was a war zone inside my head. I tugged my hoodie sleeves down over my hands, curling my fingers into the fabric to keep them from shaking. The test was in my pocket, still there, still real. As if carrying it made the truth heavier, more undeniable. When Jake finally came jogging up the path, his dark curls a little wind-tossed, he smiled at me like nothing had changed. Because for him, nothing had. "Hey, sorry," he said, sitting beside me. "Coach kept us late again. He's convinced we'll magically make playoffs if we run extra drills." I managed a weak smile. "It's okay." He leaned over and kissed my cheek, then looked at me closer. "You okay? You look, I don't know, different." My heart pounded like it wanted out of my chest. "Jake," he turned, giving me his full attention now. His knee touched mine. "What is it?" I stared down at my hands. "There's something I have to tell you." The breeze carried the faint smell of grass clippings and a distant barbecue. Kids squealed near the jungle gym. Somewhere behind us, a dog barked. But for a moment, all I heard was the sound of blood rushing in my ears. I didn't plan for this. I didn't even think it could happen, not like this. I've been so careful and everything felt fine, and then, my voice cracked. I couldn't look at him. I pulled the test out of my pocket and placed it in his hand without saying another word. Silence. I didn't breathe. He stared at it for so long I felt my stomach twist into a knot. Then he stood up. Jake Reynolds stood up, shoved the test in his hoodie pocket and said nothing. Not a single word. My lips parted. "Jake, wait here." He was already jogging off toward the parking lot, his back retreating with every step. "Jake," I called out, panic rising like a scream in my chest. "Wait, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. Didn't look back. I sat there frozen, my heart hollowing out. He left, he actually left. I was so stupid to think he'd stay. I should have told him in private. I should have waited. I should have stopped. I pressed both palms to my face, shaking. Maybe he just needed air. Maybe he no more maybes. I couldn't afford to hope. Tears welled up. My body curled in on itself again, just like last night. The same sick drop in my stomach. The same helpless, knowing fear. The minutes crawled by. 7, 12, 15. I kept checking the path like some desperate, delusional rom-com girl who didn't know the ending had already changed. Then, 21 minutes later, I heard his voice. "Anna." I turned. Jake was walking fast, almost breathless. In his hand, something small, velvet, black. My brain couldn't process it at first. He dropped to one knee in front of the bench. Right there, beside the duck pond and the ancient graffiti-scratched bench where teenagers promised forever. His brown eyes were glassy but certain. "If you're having my baby," he opened the box, revealing a modest silver ring, delicate, simple, his grandmother's, I'd later learn. "Then you're going to be my bride," I gasped. "Jake, what?" He took my hand. His own was shaking. "I don't have money or a plan or even a clue how to raise a kid. But I know one thing, Anna, I'm not letting you face this alone." I looked into his face and saw everything I hadn't dared to hope for: fear, yes, but also love, willingness. A kind of raw, uncertain courage that matched my own. "You don't have to say yes now," he added quickly. "But I needed you to know I'm not running." The tears finally came, and not out of fear this time. I didn't say yes. Not yet. Instead, I cupped his cheek with my hand, leaned in, and whispered the only truth I could hold onto. "I believe you." He pulled me into his arms, and the rest of the world faded to quiet. For the first time in days, I let myself exhale. That night, I came home different. It wasn't in my posture or in my clothes. I was still in the same hoodie, the same worn jeans, still carrying the same overstuffed backpack. But something in me had shifted. Something small but solid, like a stone settling in the center of my chest. Not fear, not shame, just resolve. I walked through the front door at exactly 7:48 p.m. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air, and I could hear the low hum of the evening news in the background. My mother was at the counter peeling potatoes like nothing had ever broken. My father sat at the table, sipping from his mug, eyes fixed on the screen. They both looked up when I walked in. No one smiled. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, letting the silence stretch thin between us. "I need to say something," I said. My voice was even, calm. I hadn't practiced it, I didn't need to. The words had been sitting just behind my teeth all day, waiting. My mother didn't stop peeling. "If it's another excuse, don't bother." I looked at my father. "I'm pregnant." Clink. His mug hit the table hard. My mother finally looked up, the peeler frozen in her hand. Her face didn't change, just the still, icy mask she wore when she wanted to punish with silence. "I'm also getting married," I added. My dad pushed his chair back with a loud scrape. "Are you joking?" "No." "You stand in this house," he growled, "after sneaking around behind our backs, after disrespecting everything we've given you, and you announce this like it's good news." "I didn't come here for applause," I said, my throat tight. "I came because you're my parents, and I thought maybe you deserved to know." My mother let out a slow, humorless laugh. "Deserved? We deserve to deal with our teenage daughter announcing she's throwing her life away." I flinched but held my ground. "I'm not throwing it away," I whispered. "I'm building something new." "With who?" my father snapped. "That boy who's probably already gone, who'll leave you raising a kid alone while he chases some job or other girl." I looked him square in the eye. "He proposed." "Oh, well then," he said sarcastically, raising his hands like that settled everything. "Congratulations, you think a ring fixes this disaster?" "No," I said, voice sharper now. "But love does, respect does, and I'm not going to hide like I've done something to be ashamed of." "You should be ashamed," my mother said coolly. "You had options, college, a future, and instead you come home with this announcement like you're proud of it." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't wipe them. I wanted them to see that I wasn't made of stone, that standing up didn't mean I wasn't breaking inside. My father picked up his mug again, then slammed it down so hard it sloshed over the edge. "You want to be grown? Fine, you're grown, get out." My breath caught. "You don't mean that," I said quietly. He stood, towering over me. "You made your choices, now live with them somewhere else. And don't think you're dragging your mess into this house," my mother added, turning back to the sink like I was nothing more than a fly she was swatting. "You want to play house, go do it in the streets." The pain hit all at once. A full-body ache that made me dizzy. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just walked out of the room, upstairs to my bedroom, and started packing the essentials. Some clothes, my toothbrush, my charger, and the small envelope with what little savings I had left from babysitting and Jake's birthday gift. My hands were trembling the whole time. When I zipped the suitcase, the sound was final, like a door closing. I took one last look at my room. The bed with the mismatched sheets. The collage of pictures I'd tacked above the desk. The fairy lights that hadn't worked in months. Goodbye. I dragged my suitcase downstairs. Neither of them came out of the kitchen. Outside, the sky was bruised purple and the lawn smelled like fresh-cut grass. I stood under the porch light with my phone shaking in my hand as I called him. Jake answered on the second ring. Anna, my voice cracked. Can you come get me? There was a pause. Are you okay? No, that was all he needed. I'm on my way. I sat on my suitcase in the driveway under the stars with nothing but the cold air and the echo of my mother's words repeating in my head. Sleep on the streets like the irresponsible girl you are. But I wasn't irresponsible. I was hurt. I was heartbroken. And I was finally done begging them to see me. Jake's headlights cut through the dark like a promise. He pulled up to the curb so fast I hadn't even finished wiping my eyes. The passenger door swung open, and he was out before I could stand. Hey, hey, he said, crouching in front of me like I was made of glass. I've got you, okay? I've got you now. I tried to speak, but the words jammed in my throat. Instead, I just nodded as he lifted my suitcase into the trunk and gently guided me into the car. The moment the door shut, a strange quiet wrapped around us. I looked straight ahead, hands folded in my lap, barely breathing. Jake pulled away from the curb with one hand on the wheel, the other brushing gently against my knee. We hadn't spoken since that call. I didn't know what to say. He broke the silence first. Did they say anything before you left? I stared out the window at the empty sidewalks and blinking porch lights. They told me to sleep on the streets. Jake let out a quiet, pained breath. I'm so sorry, Anna. I think I knew it was coming, I whispered. I just didn't think it would hurt this much. His hand found mine again. Warm, steady, not demanding, just there. The streetlights flickered past in a soft rhythm as the town fell behind us. My voice cracked as I asked the question that had been clawing at the inside of my chest all day. What if your parents hate me too? Jake glanced over, surprised. Why would they? Because I'm pregnant, because I'm barely out of high school, because I'm not what anyone dreams up when they imagine a daughter-in-law. You're what I dreamed up, he said without hesitation. Besides, they already know. I looked at him, startled. You told them? I had to. I didn't want to scare you, but after I proposed, I called my mom. I told her everything, and you know what she said? I shook my head. She said, then bring her here, she's part of the family now. Tears rushed back into my eyes, but not from fear this time. I looked down at our joined hands, barely able to believe what I was hearing. Jake continued, his voice softer now. They want to meet you tonight, is that okay? I nodded slowly. Yeah. I don't have any clothes, I look awful. My eyes are. You look like someone who's been through hell and kept going, he said gently. You look strong. I didn't know how to reply to that, so I just squeezed his hand tighter. We drove in silence for a while longer. The road stretched ahead like a map I'd never seen before. It was all unfamiliar, but I wasn't afraid. Not with Jake's hand in mine. Eventually, I whispered, You're really sure about this? He didn't take his eyes off the road. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The moon followed us, pale and silent, like it was bearing witness to a new beginning. And for the first time all night, I let myself imagine that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't walking into disaster. Maybe I was being driven towards something that looked a lot like home. Jake's house wasn't what I expected. It wasn't huge or flashy, it was warm. That was the first word that came to mind as we stepped through the front door. Not from the heater humming softly or the flicker of candles on the windowsill, but from the feeling. The kind that settles in your chest when you walk into a place where you're actually wanted. The scent of roast chicken and rosemary hit me like a hug I didn't see coming. A golden retriever with cloudy eyes shuffled to the door, tail wagging, nudging my hand as if to say you're safe here. Mom, Jake called out gently. We're home. A voice floated from the kitchen. In here, honey. He led me down a hallway lined with family photos. Jake as a kid with skinned knees. Jake holding a fishing rod twice his size. Jake in a graduation gown with his parents grinning on either side of him. Each frame felt like a glimpse into a life I didn't think people really had. Then we turned the corner, and there she was. Jake's mother, a petite woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose bun, stood at the stove basting the chicken like this was just another Tuesday night. She turned when she saw me, wiped her hands on her apron, and came over without hesitation. Anna, she said softly, it's so good to finally meet you. I barely managed a smile. Hi, Mrs. Reynolds. Oh no, sweetheart, she said, wrapping me in a hug before I could finish. It's Diane, and your family now, you don't need to be formal with me. The warmth in her arms undid something in me. I blinked fast, not ready for the way my eyes welled up. Jake's dad, a tall man with a laugh hiding in the corners of his mouth, entered just then with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. He handed one to Jake and clapped him on the back. So, he said, looking at me with kind eyes, this is the girl who stole our son's heart. I flushed. I'm not sure I deserve that much credit. Well, we think you do, he said simply. And from what Jake's told us, we already consider you family. Something twisted in my chest. Not a sharp pain, but a gentle ache. Like hearing a song you didn't know you needed until it started playing. We sat down at the dinner table, me, Jake, Diane, and Mr. Reynolds, who insisted I call him Tom. They passed plates like it was the most natural thing in the world. They asked about school, what I liked to read, how I met Jake. Not once did they ask me to explain myself. Not once did they say, how could this happen, or what are you going to do now? Instead, Diane reached across the table at one point, gently touching my wrist. You've been through enough, haven't you? I swallowed hard. Yeah. Then let's focus on love now, she said with a smile that held more comfort than any hug my mother ever gave me. I wanted to cry. But not because I was scared this time. Because it felt like the first time someone looked at me and saw me, not a mistake that needed fixing. As the night wore on, we laughed more than I expected. Tom told a story about Jake's failed attempt at cooking Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, and Jake groaned in protest while I doubled over laughing. Diane showed me photos from their family album and asked if I'd like to help plan a small backyard wedding, if that's what you two decide. And just like that, for a few precious hours, I forgot I'd been thrown out. I forgot the hollow sound of my father's voice when he told me I was a disgrace. I forgot the cold knife in my mother's words. Because here I was full. Not just from dinner, from hope, from being seen. I didn't mean to stare. The photo was just there, hanging by the dining room doorway like any ordinary picture, except nothing about it was ordinary. It was an older photograph, maybe 10, 15 years old. A ribbon-cutting ceremony. A glass building gleaming in the background. A younger Tom Reynolds in a navy suit shaking hands with city officials. And standing next to him, grinning under a pair of gold-rimmed sunglasses, was a man I'd seen before. Not in person, but in headlines. In real estate articles my dad used to clip and leave on the counter like they were scripture. David Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Real Estate Group. Billionaire, mogul, my dad's former boss. I blinked at the photo, leaned in closer just to be sure, then sat back slowly in my chair. Everything okay? Jake asked, sliding another spoonful of potatoes onto my plate. I tilted my head toward the photo, trying to keep my voice low. Is that your dad with David Reynolds? Jake looked over his shoulder, smiled like it was nothing. Yeah, that's from a city project Dad helped him launch. I think that building's a museum now. I stared at him. Wait, your dad knows that David Reynolds? Jake laughed, confused. Yeah, he is David Reynolds. The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate. Jake raised his hands quickly. Hey, don't panic. You're that Reynolds, he leaned in with a sheepish grin. I was trying to ease you into it. My voice dropped to a whisper. Jake, my father used to talk about your dad like he was some kind of king. He worked for Reynolds Real Estate back when I was a kid. He'd come home in a suit that didn't fit and pretend he was best friends with him. He used to say, people like David Reynolds don't just build cities, they own them. Jake winced. That's dramatic. He said your dad fired half his division in one afternoon during the recession. Yeah, he did, Jake shrugged. But he also gave everyone 2 years of severance and full health care. My mom told me about it. He didn't want to let them go, but the company was bleeding money. He used his own to cover the payouts. I just stared at him. At this boy who had picked me up from my driveway, who kissed my forehead like I was his whole world, and who also happened to be heir to a literal empire. Jake reached for my hand under the table. I didn't want you to see that before you saw me. I don't care about your last name, I whispered. I can't believe it. My dad used to throw his name around like he was untouchable. Jake smiled. Well, I guess he was. I let out a disbelieving breath. Does he know about me, I mean? About my dad? Jake nodded. Yeah, he remembered your dad, said he was smart, rough around the edges, but sharp. That made me laugh. That's one way to describe Greg Blake. Jake squeezed my hand. Look, if this feels weird, we don't have to talk about any of it tonight. I just wanted you to meet my parents as me, not as Reynolds Jr. or whatever. I studied his face, suddenly struck by how honest he looked, like someone who had no interest in hiding behind a name or a family fortune. Then he leaned in closer, lips brushing my ear as he whispered, but just for the record, wedding dress shopping's gonna be really fun. I burst out laughing, the kind of laugh that bubbles up when your heart has too much relief to contain. Across the table, Diane looked over with a smile. "What's so funny?" "Nothing," I said quickly, cheeks flushed. But something told me she already knew. And for once, the weight I carried felt lighter, like maybe, just maybe, the universe was putting things back in balance. The sun was high and the sky an almost too perfect shade of blue, the kind that feels fake, like someone painted it on just to see if you'd believe it. I stood on the sidewalk outside the house I grew up in, holding my breath and bracing for a storm. I hadn't wanted to come alone. Jake offered to drive me, even to come in and help pack. But something in me, some stubborn shred of pride, wanted to prove I could walk through that door and not crumble. Just in and out, I told myself. Grab your things, get out. Don't engage, don't react. I knocked once out of habit, then opened the door with my old key. The air inside still smelled like my mother's lemon cleaner and whatever my father microwaved for lunch. It was eerily familiar, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt smaller, dimmer. My father's voice came before I even stepped off the mat. Well, well, back for more charity. He sat in his usual chair, still in his undershirt, nursing a mug of coffee that was probably 3 hours cold. His tone was bitter, as if I owed him something he had yet to invent. I didn't answer. My mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed over her chest, eyes sweeping over me like I was a used coat someone left behind. "Don't forget your street pillow," she said. "Or did your little boyfriend buy you a silk one?" Still, I said nothing. I just walked past them head high, even as my heart thudded so loud it drowned out their sneers. Every insult was a test. Every jab was bait. They wanted me to snap, to scream, to break. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and opened the door to my room, what used to be my room. Half of my posters were gone, drawers emptied, and the bed stripped of sheets. They'd started clearing it out. I moved quickly, gathering the rest of my things into the duffel I'd left behind. Old notebooks, a framed photo of me and my grandma, the sweater Jake had lent me last fall. I shoved everything in, zipped it, and took one last look at the 4 walls that had watched me grow and fall. Then I heard it, a low rumble at first, then louder, vibrating the floorboards, rattling the windows. My father stood and walked to the front window. "What the hell is that?" I was halfway down the stairs when my mother yanked the curtain aside. "Oh my God!" The roar filled the house now, a deep, thunderous growl like the sky was splitting open. I reached the front door just as it landed. A sleek dark gray helicopter touched down on the lawn, flattening the grass and bending the rose bushes like paper. The blades whipped the wind so hard it nearly knocked over our neighbors' trash bins. The Reynolds logo gleamed on the side. My parents stood frozen in the doorway, mouths open. And then he stepped out, Jake, dressed in a navy suit, wind tousling his curls, calm as ever. He walked straight toward the house with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. I stepped out beside my parents and met him at the edge of the lawn. "I told you I'd pick you up," he said, smiling like we were just heading to brunch. Behind us, my father finally found his voice. "R. Reynolds, as in Reynolds Real Estate." Jake turned slightly, offering a polite nod. "I'm Jake Reynolds. And I believe you've underestimated your daughter." My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. Jake took my bag from my shoulder and handed it to the pilot. Then he reached for my hand. I didn't look back as we walked toward the chopper. I didn't have to. The sound of those blades cutting through the air said everything I couldn't. I was done begging. I was done shrinking. And as the helicopter lifted off the lawn, my hand in Jake's, my parents grew smaller and smaller below, until they were nothing more than 2 shadows on the grass, watching the girl they discarded rise. The helicopter door clicked shut behind us, muffling the sound of the blades to a steady, distant churn. But their expressions, I could still see them perfectly through the glass. My father, standing like a man struck by lightning, gripping the porch railing as if it might explain what had just happened. My mother, pale and unmoving, her mouth slightly open, her arms crossed but her fingers twitching like she wasn't sure what to do next. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. My silence said more than a farewell ever could. Jake slid on a headset and passed me one, then gave the pilot a small nod. As we lifted off, I watched our old house shrink beneath us, the roof where I used to stargaze, the swing set long since rusted over, the kitchen window where my mother used to leave the light on when I came home late, until she didn't. I'd thought it would feel satisfying, rising above it all, but the truth was it felt quiet, not victorious, not angry, just done. Jake glanced over at me mid-flight, his fingers brushing mine. You okay? I nodded slowly. Yeah, you didn't say anything to them. There was nothing left to say. I expected him to challenge that, maybe tell me I'd regret it. But instead, he smiled softly and gave my hand a squeeze. That's exactly what I thought. The city unfolded beneath us like a painting, lights blinking on, traffic moving like veins through concrete. Somewhere below, people were living out ordinary lives. And here I was, flying towards something I couldn't have imagined just a few months ago. You didn't have to do all that, I said quietly, turning toward him. The suit, the helicopter, showing up like a movie ending. Jake shrugged, a playful glint in his eye. They needed to understand what you're worth. I figured a little dramatic flair might help them catch up. I smirked despite myself. You made a statement. He leaned back, watching me with that look that always made me feel steadier. They tossed away someone extraordinary, Anna, letting them see what you walked away from, and what you walked into wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The helicopter tilted slightly as we began our descent. I could see the rooftop of the Reynolds' downtown apartment building coming into view, sleek glass, warm balcony lights glowing like it was waiting for me. When we landed, the rooftop doors opened before I even reached them. Diane was waiting at the elevator, arms open, a familiar smile lighting up her face. I made up the guest room, she said gently. Unless you two decide to elope tonight and ruin all my wedding plans. I blinked. You're okay with me staying here. Honey, she said, looping her arm through mine, you're not staying, you're moving forward. She led me inside, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe without flinching. Inside, everything smelled like cinnamon and clean linen. The walls were lined with art that made you pause and smile. There was a photo of Jake at age 5 in a superhero cape, a framed napkin doodle from his first lemonade stand. Little things, personal things, home things. My life had just imploded. But here, in this place, in this family, I didn't feel like a charity case. I felt like a person who still had a future. And this time, it would be mine to build. The morning started in soft light and silence, at least for a little while. I was curled up on the guest bed, still half wrapped in the blanket Diane had brought me last night. There was a strange calm in the air, the kind that always follows a storm, or maybe the kind that comes right before one. Jake had left early for class, pressing a kiss to my forehead before slipping out the door. I'll be back by noon, he whispered. Try to rest. I had just begun to drift off again when my phone buzzed. Once, then again, then it started vibrating like it was under attack. I groaned, flipping it over 13 missed calls, all from Mom and Dad. No voicemails, just an avalanche of calls, one after the other like they were trying to pound their way into my life through sheer persistence. Then the knock. 3 quick, sharp raps on the apartment door. The sound froze the air in my lungs. I didn't move at first. But then came a voice, my mother's. Anna, we know you're in there. I sat up, heart racing. My pulse thudded in my ears. How did they even get in the building? Open this door right now. Greg's voice now, louder, angrier. I stood slowly, slipped on my hoodie and padded barefoot toward the front door. My hand hovered over the handle, but I didn't open it. I didn't have to. Because a second later, they forced their way in. They must have tailgated a delivery person or someone else entering the building because suddenly they were in the apartment, standing in the foyer like they owned the place. What the hell do you think you're doing? My father barked. You humiliated us, my mother hissed, stepping toward me like I was a stain she meant to scrub out. I stumbled back instinctively, pressing against the wall near the kitchen. You land a helicopter on our lawn like you're better than us. My father seethed, red-faced. You had the nerve to drag that boy in there to parade us in front of the neighborhood. I didn't drag anyone, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I came to pack my things. You made the rest into a spectacle. You made us into a spectacle, my mother snapped. And now everyone's talking. You made us look like fools. You did that all by yourselves, I whispered. Greg took a step forward, chest puffed, jaw tight. You think you're above us now, living with some rich boy and his fancy parents. You think that makes you better. I think, I said clearly, that I don't owe you anything anymore. Something in my father's face twisted, and for a moment I wondered if he was about to yell again or worse. But then another voice rang out from behind them, calm and cutting. That's enough. They turned at the sound. David Reynolds stood at the end of the hallway, crisp in a charcoal suit, arms folded loosely behind his back. His presence filled the room, not loud, not forceful, just unshakable. Greg's mouth opened, but no words came. David stepped closer, gaze steady. This is my home and you've crossed a line. Linda looked between us, suddenly unsure of herself. We're just trying to intimidate her, shame her. David's voice didn't rise, but somehow it got colder. That ends now. Greg squared his shoulders. You don't know the full story. I know enough, David interrupted, voice like steel. I've heard how you treated your daughter when she needed you most, and I saw how she walked away with more dignity than you ever gave her. Silence. David took another step forward. This is your only warning. Harass her again, show up uninvited, contact her without permission, and you'll hear from my attorneys. And believe me, they're much louder than I am. For once, my parents didn't have a comeback. Greg's jaw twitched. Linda clutched her purse like it might rescue her from the shame coiling around her. Without another word, they turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind them like a judge's gavel. I stood there, frozen, my hands shaking. David turned to me, his expression softening. Are you all right? I nodded barely. He walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, handing it to me with a gentleness that almost undid me. Families like that, he said quietly, only understand power. But you held your power without raising your voice, that matters. I took a long sip of water, heart still hammering in my chest. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't feel like a lost girl. I felt like someone worth defending. The sky was that kind of perfect pale gold you only see at the edge of spring, warm, open, endless. A gentle breeze played with the orchids arranged in soft clusters around the ceremony arch. Everything smelled like fresh grass and lilacs. I stood behind the closed double doors, heart thudding under my lace-covered chest. The string quartet began to play. It was time. Diane reached for my hands. You ready, sweetheart? I smiled, breathless. More than ever. The doors opened. And I stepped out, not as the girl who had been kicked out of her house, but as the woman who had built something better from the ashes. The aisle stretched out before me, lined with people who weren't just guests, they were family by choice and love. Jake stood at the altar, eyes wide, soft and stunned like he'd never really believed I'd say yes until now. I walked toward him, each step light, steady. There was no shame trailing behind me, no doubt. Just the gentle rustle of my dress and the sound of my life becoming my own. At the front, David waited too, standing just behind Jake. He wasn't just the groom's father today, he was the man who had stepped in when others stepped away. The man who, in quiet ways, reminded me I deserved protection, not punishment. We exchanged vows beneath a canopy of white blooms and sunlight, laughter and tears threading between our promises. When Jake said, "You saved me too," I knew it was true. After the ceremony, during the toasts under the tent, David stood and raised his glass. To Anna, he said, voice warm but resonant, who showed us all the meaning of dignity under fire, and who reminded me personally that strength doesn't always speak loudly, but it always leaves an echo. The guests applauded. I blinked back, tears. And somewhere far away, from a cracked phone screen or someone else's social feed, Greg and Linda Blake watched the video, watched the daughter they discarded walk into the world surrounded by love, wrapped in grace, celebrated without them. I hoped it stung. Not out of spite, but because they needed to feel what it meant to be excluded, to finally understand that silence, when earned, is the sharpest revenge of all. I leaned my head on Jake's shoulder as the music swelled. I didn't need a picture-perfect family anymore. I had built my own, and this was just the beginning. The world felt slower now. Not in a dull way, but in that sacred, still way life takes on when something brand new enters it. Like time itself was kneeling at the cradle. Our daughter was born on a quiet Tuesday morning just after sunrise. Jake hadn't let go of my hand once. Not when I cried, not when I screamed, not when I swore I couldn't take another second. And certainly not when her tiny cry filled the room like the most fragile thunder I'd ever heard. When they placed her in my arms, 7 pounds, dark hair, sleepy fists, I didn't cry like I thought I would. I just stared. Stared at this impossibly small person who had changed everything before even opening her eyes. Her name was Lily. She blinked up at me like she already knew the hard part of my story, and now she was here for the soft chapters. Jake leaned in close, whispering just above a tearful breath, "You're not just my bride, Anna, you're my hero." I looked over at him, this boy-turned man who had grown with me, not around me. He kissed my forehead, then our daughter's, and I realized something I hadn't said aloud until now. We were a family. Not a patched-together version of what could have been, not a substitute. A real one. Diane and David came by later that day with flowers and baby clothes that were way too fancy for a newborn. Diane cried when she held Lily, whispering prayers over her head that made me tear up in the corner. David simply smiled, rubbed Jake's back once, and said, "She's going to change everything." And I believed him. At night, when the hospital lights dimmed and it was just us in that room, I watched Jake rock her to sleep. I watched her yawn for the first time. I watched myself in the reflection of the window, and I saw a woman I didn't recognize but liked. A woman who hadn't broken under judgment, who hadn't collapsed under rejection, who'd stood up, built something from scratch, and now held the proof in her arms. There were no more headlines in my head, no more echoes of slammed doors or cruel words. Just the soft, steady rhythm of a life unfolding exactly as it should, and for the first time in forever I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Not to them, not to the world, not even to myself. I had already won. The air was soft with spring. Lily skipped beside me, her little backpack bouncing with each step, hair tied in a braid that refused to stay neat. She was 6 now, sharp as a whip, endlessly curious, and always asking questions about how things worked, why flowers bloom, and whether butterflies feel lonely. We stopped at the gate of her school like we did every morning. She kissed my cheek with a hurried, "Love you, Mommy," before darting toward her friends with a wave. I stood there a moment longer, watching her slip into the tide of childhood, her laughter ringing like wind chimes in the morning breeze. And that's when I saw her, sitting on the park bench just beyond the school fence, hands folded in her lap, hair more gray than I remembered, eyes fixed on Lily with a sadness I couldn't quite name. My mother. I hadn't seen her in person in over 5 years. Not since the day she and my father barged into our apartment like a storm they thought they still controlled. There had been no apologies since, no olive branches. Just the occasional silence between birthdays, and now this. I didn't stop walking. My heels clicked gently against the sidewalk as I passed, steps steady, eyes forward. She didn't speak, didn't wave, just watched, and I let her, because she wasn't here for me, she was here to see what she'd lost. Maybe it was guilt that brought her, maybe curiosity, or maybe, though I didn't want to believe it, regret. But whatever it was, I didn't need it. Not anymore. I reached the corner and paused just long enough to glance back over my shoulder. She was still there, alone, motionless. For a moment, I remembered being 18, standing at the edge of the lawn with a suitcase dragging behind me and my heart feeling like it might never recover. "I'll cope on my own," I had told them that night. And I had. More than coped, I had built a life, a family, a sense of self that could no longer be shaken by the echo of a door that once slammed shut. Jake was waiting for me at home, probably making his second cup of coffee, humming off-key in the kitchen. Lily would come home later with a drawing of a horse that looked like a cloud and ask if we could have pancakes for dinner. And I would still be me, not because of who left, but because of who stayed, because of who I became. And that was the end of my story. I keep thinking about Diane, how she welcomed me with open arms the first night I stepped into their home. No questions, no judgment, just warmth. If you were in her place, would you have done the same for someone like me? Let me know in the comments, because I've never forgotten what that kindness meant. And if this story touched you even a little, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more. There's always another story worth hearing.